Good afternoon, everyone. I think we will get underway. Everyone has been very diligent and patient. There's a lot of information that gets thrown at you in these 2 days. So we will work our way through my second talk and then these last three companies who certainly deserve your attention. And so thank you. Okay, so I use my second talk in a very particular way. I've already gone through my macro outlook, and you've heard lots of macro outlooks from lots of people, so there's no need to do that again, I don't think. So instead what I do is go through the companies that are here at the conference that are in the Maven portfolio. And my goal is to give the elevator pitch on each one. Like I say, you get a huge amount of information thrown at you during these 2 days, and it's easy for stories to get confused, lost in that mix. So what I try and do is describe the key investment thesis for each of the stories that I own. So that's the goal. Just before I get into that list of stories, I'm just going to start with this concept of structuring your picks. This is basically what I finished my talk with yesterday, which was the kinds of companies that I'm looking to buy these days. It's really easy when you're at a conference like this to fall in love with exploration. Exploration is so easy to fall in love with. The stories are always interesting, the projects always have potential, the ideas are always tantalizing, especially when you have a bit of a scientific bent to you. But don't just fall in love with stories. Make sure that you're more strategic in how you're spreading bets within your portfolio. And I would say make sure you include these kinds of companies within your list, the mid to large producers, because they give you the straightforward leverage. The new and single asset producers, who I think are that leverage plus because they're going to be takeout targets. Projects that are strong but also splashy, so they're advancing, they're defined resources, they look good, but they have that potential for exciting exploration results, or a strategic investor to come in, or something of that nature, so they have the strength but they have the splash as well. And then top tier explorers, really just the best of the best, and royalty companies. So make sure you consider all of those categories when you look at your portfolio, and don't let yourself just fall in love with exploration stories. With all of these companies, I guess excluding the mid to large producers, because the share structure is a different thing with them, but in general, make sure you're paying attention to good share structure, who are the long-term shareholders, does the group have access to capital, and is there more than one way to win? So especially when a story is a little bit more advanced, where's this story going? What are the exit possibilities for this story? Is there more than one of them? Because if there's only one, if it's, oh, we're going to get taken out, that's a questionable concept. So is there more than one way to win? And then what I also really like to emphasize is, does management have a clear and detailed plan to create value in the near term? This isn't just about doing science experiments. There's a lot of scientists here, they're geologists, and they love it, and that's great, but the point is creating value. So do they have a clear and detailed plan for how they're going to use your shareholder money to create new value? It may or may not work, that's exploration, but they have to have ideas for how they're going to create that value, and if that doesn't work, then where they're going to go next. And it's amazing how often, unfortunately, that is missing with smaller companies. Okay, so that's my sort of introduction. Now I'm just going to go through the companies that are here, that are in the Maven portfolio, and I'm just going in order down that list. So I'm starting with the strong and splashy and just going down the list. So the first that comes up in that ordering is Nighthawk Gold, from whom you will hear shortly. Nighthawk is working up in the Northwest Territories. This is a sort of perfect example of strong and splashy. So they have this Colomac deposit. It's big. It's 2.5 million ounces. Its average grade is 1.6 grams, but in the last 2 years, they've clearly defined high-grade components to that. Those are becoming more coherent as work progresses. But in addition, they have this really large underexplored land package, and so there's both the strength of the asset, the deposit, and there's real potential for splash, both from the high-grade shoots within Colomac and from the exploration targets. They're putting half of their money towards regional exploration. They got lots of money, they're $13 million in the bank, and currently doing a financing, raising $11 million with ease. So they have access to capital, which in itself is a significant statement, and they have that clear plan to create value in the near term. There's probably more words on the slides than I even have time to say, because I'm trying to do each one in a minute, so pardon me if I don't get to every point in detail. Another strong and splashy company is Regulus. So they have a strong resource already that they have put together very quickly. The chart that I have here is showing their resource growth, and it has this group has really pulled together the resource quickly. What took the time was figuring out the land position and the agreements so that they could actually work this thing. Once they did that, they've started to grow this resource very quickly. There's a lot more drilling ahead, so I expect that resource growth to continue. They are well funded, they have clear access to capital, and they have that clear plan to create value. And this is a project that can generate real splash, like look at some of those drill results that are of late. 470 meters of better than 1% copper, that's the kind of thing that the market pays attention to, even when the market is not that awake, right? So, strong asset, lots of money, and potential for splashy results. Then I'm going to move straight into top-tier explorers. I actually, as much as I say you should have all these producers, it turns out I have a lot of explorers here. So Compass Gold is certainly one of those. This is an exploration company in Mali. I realize that jurisdictionally, Mali isn't the place that stands out to a lot of people, but you can mitigate the perceived risks of a place like that if you have a group that knows how to operate. And this is from the team that built Iamgold. They have operated in Mali for decades. They've built mines there. They know the people, and they know how much gold there is yet to be discovered in that country. Really methodical approach, lots of targets to test. The methodical approach has already paid off in a discovery at their first target. That discovery will continue to see work while they then move on and also test the next target and the target after that. So, is this going to shoot to the moon tomorrow? Is this going to be a discovery tomorrow? Who knows? But this is a methodical group that's had a lot of success already, who I think has a really strong pipeline of targets in a jurisdiction where they're very comfortable. And it's a really tight share structure with good access to capital. Quebec Precious Metals. So this is the Sakami project. Sakami is 90 kilometers away from the Éléonore mine. Éléonore is a great underground gold mine that only has 7 years of gold left in its reserves. Goldcorp, now Newmont Goldcorp, wants to keep Éléonore going. They want more ore to feed into that mine. They invested in Quebec Precious Metals when the company was being formed because they're aware that the gold zone that's developing at La Pointe looks exactly like the gold that they're currently mining at Éléonore. So that's a really interesting setup. The other really interesting thing about Quebec Precious Metals is La Pointe does not have a resource on it yet. The goal is to put a resource out by the end of the year, and I think that that's a resource that has the potential to really impress the market, surprise the market with its size. They're aiming for at least 2 million ounces, and its grade. It looks like it will be better than 3 grams gold. So it's going to be a surprisingly large, high-grade resource that starts at surface that's right next door to an operating mine that needs more ore. That's the kind of story that ties together in a way that really makes sense. Also, tight share structure and well-funded. These are underlying requirements that they all have to meet, right? Tutor Gold. Treaty Creek, this is up in the Golden Triangle. Treaty Creek has seen, say that 10 times fast, a lot of work in the past. It's seen 69 drill holes that have delineated 2 zones. But this isn't an area where there's a lot of gold, like a ridiculous amount of gold, like 80 million ounces of gold. But I was just chatting with Eric, and he's like, yeah, those are kind of soil anomalies. And I don't mean to knock Seabridge, but the huge deposits that they have up at KSM are not economic because they're too low grade and too isolated to work. So if Treaty Creek were just developing into another massive, not sufficiently high grade resource to make sense, then it wouldn't be interesting. But Ken Conkin, who's the geologist who figured out the high grade at Pretium, which is crazy high grade, has come on board at Treaty Creek, and he sees the potential he sees the system as having more than one event, and that there's high grade at surface, cutting through the body. It's a really interesting setup. Ken is ridiculously excited. The rocks make sense, the system makes sense, and this is a system that, in that previous load of work, returns some pretty impressive numbers, like 560 meters of a gram of gold. So a couple moving parts, a lot of unanswered questions, but a lot of interesting possibility in a project that hasn't seen much work lately and is getting a lot of new energy and ideas from a very well-versed geologist. Okay, then I'll move into royalty companies. Most people here are quite familiar with EMX, a regular presenter here, and a company that I have owned for a long time. Not as long as they've been around, which is 16 years, but after 16 years of finding and farming out projects, buying royalties, and making strategic investments, EMX is currently at its most exciting, interesting position it's ever been at, right? It has this immense treasury. It has enough cash coming in from royalty and project payments that it's basically covering its costs. So then it can deploy this bank account to create value for shareholders, which is the whole point, right? Let's circle right back to the beginning. So what are they going to do with $90 million? The irony here is that EMX has a lower enterprise value now than it did before it got paid $90 million for having made a really good strategic investment 7 years ago. So they're getting punished for doing really well. And the only reason that happens is because people wonder, what are they going to do with $90 million? Are they going to waste it? I'd say that EMX's team has perhaps the best track record in the industry of deploying capital well, and so I think that there's going to be some really interesting and valuable developments over the next little while as EMX demonstrates its prowess at deploying capital. We've seen some small deals, like this big royalty package that they just signed on in Alaska. I think we'll also see a big deal or two that are cash flowing royalties, but not normal, not gold cash flowing royalties. I think we're going to see something interesting. Phosphate, I don't know what it might be, but I think there's going to be some interesting developments with EMX. Then I'm going to go into, I have 3 more companies, 2 are zinc and 1 is uranium. So in the zinc space, my comment is the zinc bull market is being delayed, but it cannot be denied. The fundamentals are still too strong. So while zinc is not likely to attract a lot of attention as a sector in the near term, while the trade war issue keeps grinding us all down, at the end of the day, we really do need functional new zinc mines, projects that make sense to build. Tinka Resources is a standout in terms of going down that path. They have one of the largest undeveloped zinc assets in the world, controlled by a junior, and they're in a pro-mining part of Peru. They're surrounded by infrastructure, including lots of other mines. PEA is about to come out. Graham will tell you all about that shortly. That will put Iamgold, the project, in a pretty small group of companies, or of projects that have mine plans wrapped around them for high-grade zinc. Tinka is also well-funded. They have really interesting exploration targets. They have grown, again here I'm using a chart that shows resource growth, because that's one of the things about the Tinka story that really stands out to me, is how quickly and effectively they've been able to use exploration to create value by developing a really significant zinc resource. And they have really interesting plans for how they're going to continue doing that this year. So that's the Tinka story, and I think it stands out in the zinc space. Vendetta is, the Pegmont project is an advanced zinc asset, and what is important to me about Pegmont to say is that this is a project that works several different ways. You want multiple ways to win, right? So there's at least 3 different ways that Pegmont can work. It can work as feed for Cannington, which is a mine that South 32 runs that really needs more ore, and Pegmont would be perfect ore for it. It could build itself as an independent operation. The PEA that came out says as much. Or it could retrofit the nearby non-operating Osborne mill. So there's 3 different ways that this story can work. And the market had really focused on the first of those and wanted to see South 32 swing in and buy up this project. And that didn't happen in the timeline that was necessarily expected. And then that put pressure on the share price. So it's a stock that has seen a lot of pressure lately. And that also resulted in a fund exiting the story. So the share price has really struggled. But now, one of the big questions there was that the ownership needed to be solidified. That question has been answered. Plans have been laid to advance Pegmont so that it could work in any 3 of those scenarios still. Vendetta, I think, has come back to life at this point, and it is, like Tinka's project, one of those rare zinc assets that works in a market that needs precisely those kinds of projects. And last but not least, ISO Energy. So haven't had time to touch on uranium, but uranium is a bull market that will come. I think Craig will probably touch on some of the factors there. It's a bull market that will come. We don't know exactly when that will happen, but it will. ISO Energy is probably the only junior with a new uranium discovery, I don't know, in the world in the last few years, at least a good one, because the space has been so abandoned. Nobody's doing any work. Well, ISO Energy managed to raise $4.5 million in a bought deal financing late last year based on a single drill hole discovery that they made at the hurricane zone. This is a portfolio of projects that came out of NextGen, obviously a real success story in the uranium space. This first project that they've tested is now a absolutely legitimate uranium discovery in the Athabasca Basin. It's already looking good. There's clear indications that there's potential to extend this thing along strike to the east, as Craig will describe. And ISO is, at the very bottom line, ISO is doing active high-grade uranium exploration and announcing it into a sector that's otherwise almost silent because nobody's doing anything. But there's a lot of people who are interested in uranium. They want the uranium market. They know it's coming. So that's why ISO share price did very well as this discovery came together in the last few months. And I think that that's a story that will continue as they continue to use the money that they have in the bank to grow this situation. Hey, look at that. That's the end of my talk, and I'm 4 minutes ahead. That means you each get 1 extra minute, and then we have 1 to spare. No, it doesn't. Anyways, thank you for bearing with me through that. And with no further ado, I will ask Suzanne.